What if the United States, driven by Arctic competition and a desperate hunger for rare earth minerals, didn't wait for a yes from Copenhagen? What if the US military actually landed in Greenland without consent? On paper, it looks like a strategic masterstroke. Total control over the GI-UK gap, a monopoly on the world's largest untapped mineral reserves, and a permanent unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Arctic. But in reality, the moment boots hit the frozen ground, the world as we know it would vanish. We aren't just talking about a diplomatic spat, we're talking about the immediate death of NATO, the birth of a new American isolationist period, and a green light for every other expansionist power on the earth to redraw the map in blood. So today, I'm looking at a question that no one thought needed an answer before last week, and that is, what if the US occupied Greenland, a day no one thought possible, a day when the US occupies an ally? First, we have to look at the legal reality. Greenland is an autonomous territory, but it is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and Denmark is a founding member of NATO, and under international law, landing troops without consent isn't protection, it's an invasion.
Firstly, I believe that the American president should be taken seriously when he says that he wants Greenland. But I also want to make it clear that if the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. That is including our NATO and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War.
And this, for a NATO member, is somewhat of a paradox. Denmark would instantly invoke Article 4, calling for emergency consultations, but then comes the big one, Article 5, collective defence. The rule is simple, an attack on one is an attack on all. But what happens when the attacker on a NATO member is the person who runs most of NATO's defence? NATO would face two choices, both of them fatal. Either the alliance defends Denmark against the United States, leading to a hot war between Western allies, or the alliance does nothing. If it does nothing, NATO is dead. Trust would collapse overnight. The alliance built to deter invasions will now officially count an invader as one of its own. While the diplomats are screaming in Brussels, the rest of the world is reacting. Overnight, the United States becomes a global pariah. In the UN Security Council, the US will be forced to veto its own condemnation, a move of such blatant hypocrisy it would shatter any remaining moral authority Washington has. The closest of friends would become the coldest of enemies. The European Union would likely implement sweeping sanctions, suspend defence cooperation, and probably for the first time actually build a unified military force independent of American influence. Neutral states from Brazil to India would look at American security guarantees and see a use-by date. The rules-based international order wouldn't just be wounded, it would be dead on arrival. And the moment those troops land, Washington loses its right to condemn any future invasion from Ukraine to Taiwan. Then there's the ground reality. Denmark wouldn't fight a conventional war, they would be hard pushed to do that. Instead, they would internationalise the crisis, pulling every diplomatic and legal lever to make the occupation's cost unbearable. But the real trouble starts in Greenland, where the 57,000 people who live there have repeatedly rejected the idea of being bought by the Americans, and they wouldn't see this as American protection, they would probably see this as colonial occupation.
I believe in democracy and I believe in the international rules. Of course, I also believe that you do not change borders by force either one way or another.
Greenland would transform from a strategic asset into a permanent political liability. Instead of a friendly partner, the US would have a resentful, occupied population on a territory that is nearly impossible to logistically secure. It wouldn't be a base, it would be a 2 million square kilometre colony. So who actually wins? Well, not the US. The immediate winners are Russia and China. This is the quiet disaster underneath everything else. Moscow would point to Greenland and tell the world, see, we told you. Sovereignty is just a suggestion. Ukraine was defence, but Greenland is empire building, and Beijing would use this as the ultimate justification for a move on Taiwan, arguing that if the leader of the free world can annex territory for national security, then so can they. And inside the US, the situation will be just as chaotic. This wouldn't be a unifying war like the days after 9/11, it would be a constitutional nightmare. You'd see things like legal challenges, mass lawsuits and congressional battles over the legality of the move. You'll see military dissent, some senior officers potentially refusing what they view as unlawful orders to invade a treaty ally, and the comparison would be Iraq but worse, maybe Vietnam but colder, and all with no terrorist threat to justify it to the public. And all of this, no doubt, would lead to massive market turmoil. So, to summarise, if the US ever actually occupied Greenland, it would trade its global legitimacy for a piece of ice it already has access to. Through the 1951 Defence of Greenland Agreement, the US already has bases there, it already has strategic cooperation. By taking Greenland, the US would destroy the very system that makes its power possible. NATO would be shattered, the post-1945 order would take a fatal blow, and the world would slide faster into a multipolar, militarised free-for-all. It turns out that the most expensive way to get something is to steal it from a friend. But what do you think? Is the strategic value of the Arctic worth the death of the Western Alliance? Let me know in the comments, especially if you're from the US. And again, and as always, thank you for watching, have a great week, and until I see you in the next video, out.